Stardust, Chapter 34, Kaleidoscope. 8 AM, May 24th, 2015. Briefing Room, XCOM Beta Site. The atmosphere that permeated the briefing room was grave as Bradford entered and walked towards the head of the table. Only a handful of other figures were present, and he gave them each a look as he reached his destination. Charles Shen looked about ready to collapse from exhaustion, if the bags under his eyes and his drooping expression were anything to go on. He took a long drink from his coffee cup as Bradford met his gaze, and he did his best to look attentive. The second was the recently promoted Major Yumiko Fujikawa, who was now in command of the strike teams. Last was Captain Brett Weaver, Skull Squadron's leader and most senior of the surviving interceptor pilots. All that's missing now is Valen, Bradford mused before he caught himself and suppressed a wince. She's better off in medical. Gentlemen, we're all busy, so we'll have to be brief, he said without preamble. Charles, you report.
All potential resources from the Alpha site have been moved and installed at our current facility. EA is now up and running successfully and producing more than enough power for the base. Charles produced a tablet computer and tapped several icons on it to send the information to Bradford's tablet. In addition, the crews have stripped all of the crashed and destroyed ships for anything useful. 10 minutes past midnight, demolition charges were activated to destroy the Alpha site and anything that could not be recovered from the alien ships.
Good. Brett? We're down to just over 50% strength for all our interceptor squadrons. Gonna recommend folding Ghost and a Diamond until we can get replacement craft and pilots. Could have been much worse though. Had they kept their formation throughout the whole fight, it would have been a much closer thing, even with the National Guard's intervention. The pilot summarized with an almost vacant expression. Yumiko?
60% casualties amongst the strike teams, and closer to 75 with the security teams,
she reported, and her voice was hollow as she scrolled through the list of deaths.
We've got perhaps 3 effective strike teams at the moment, and they will likely need to be promoted and dispersed among the new recruits when they arrive. It'll be a few weeks at the minimum before the new strike teams will be in any condition I'm comfortable with to deploy.
Before any further could be discussed, the door to the briefing room swung open violently to reveal Moira Valen, a stressed medical orderly and an apologetic-looking security officer.
I don't need your help, nursemaid!
Valen spat at the medical orderly, who trailed behind the scientist with a wheelchair. Valen herself hobbled towards the table with a cane in her right hand and a tablet in her left. The seriousness of her expression was only enhanced by the black and blue bruises that still covered the places of her face that weren't bandaged, and a neck brace was wrapped around her neck. A long moment of silence passed as Moira stopped at the table and simply waited. Annoyance grew on her face before she turned back to the medical orderly and screamed,
"Get out!"
Bradford dismissed the orderly with a nod before fixing Moira with a serious expression. You should be in recovery. If it's something important, then have one of your subordinates—
Twilight Sparkle is dying,
Valen interrupted as she hobbled over to the video monitor at the far end of the table. The screen flickered to life with a few pressed keys, and several medical diagrams of the unicorn appeared.
The bullet was extracted safely, but the shot pierced one of her lungs. She also has lost a significant amount of blood, and while the threat of internal bleeding is no longer present, we lack any way of providing a transfusion. She's also not responding to any of the treatments we've tried to— Wait, what? You're trying to save one of them? For God's sake, why?
Brett asked with no small degree of skepticism, and was rewarded with Valen's imperious glare.
Thank you for your opinion, Blunt Instruments. If I require you to speak, then I shall ask you to, she said coolly before turning back to the monitor and pointing at one of the pictures with her cane.
No, just wait 1 minute. Valen whipped around to face the pilot and brought her cane down onto the hardwood table with a bang.
She saved my life! Now shut up, or get out if you don't have anything productive to add!
Any further arguing died instantly when Bradford cleared his throat. Continue, Doctor. His tone was the same as always, but his expression made it clear that he was a moment away from ordering Valen back to medical.
The treatments we use on a regular basis to accelerate healing is having no effect on Twilight. And with the blood loss, her body is struggling to even function. She hasn't woken up from her coma since her recovery in the field, and I fear she never will.
Valen paused before continuing.
The most likely causes of this condition are tied to recent events. The strain of the abilities she had displayed may have permanently damaged her ability to access what she called the field. I scanned her with a TED and found barely a tenth of the power she was drawing passively during the first recording earlier this month. The second possible cause is our change in location. Early transcripts of Twilight's conversations with Charles described the field as hard to access due to disuse. But over her time with Stardust, it became easier to access.
Valen's voice cracked, but she rallied quickly.
If her physiology is tied to her access of the field, then the Alpha Site is likely the only place on Earth where she could recover from her weakened state.
And that's no longer an option,
Shen added as he closed his eyes. How much time does she have? Bradford asked as he looked over the medical images on the monitor.
A week? Maybe more, maybe less. Barring a miracle, there's simply no way she'll survive in our care.
Valen stated bluntly before tapping several times on her tablet.
Charles, our current stockpile of Valyrium is now well stocked, correct?
At the moment, yes.
The engineer blinked before rubbing his eyes.
I don't have the exact numbers, but the recovery teams were able to retrieve a significant amount from storage at the alien base as well as from the downed alien craft at the Alpha Site. Why?
Valen's initial response was to smirk and tap her tablet. Both Bradford and Shen's tablets pinged twice to report new messages. She didn't wait for them to even finish opening the messages before continuing.
I received a very interesting message from one of my colleagues shortly before the attack, and I feel that it may prove useful when combined with one of the projects created with Twilight's help. Charles, do you have enough resources to proceed with Kaleidoscope?
A long moment passed, and the engineer's sleep-deprived mind connected the dots to what Valen was suggesting. And then his eyes lit up.
The boys would need at least 24 hours minimum to finish the construction, and that's if they drop everything they're doing and devote 100% of their time to it. If Kaleidoscope's charging cycle is similar to Fragorok, it would need...
Charles closed his eyes for a handful of seconds before opening them again.
48 hours before it could successfully activate. I should head down and get things started now. I'll also need to create some type of portable device for the return trip.
Wait, Bradford said, which resulted in a tight-lipped glare from Valen and a kicked puppy look from Shen. I'm looking at the design schematics in the email from Marazuki, and I think I know what you're planning. But what are the risks with Kaleidoscope?
The only risk would be the volunteers, and I fully intend to test with a shiv before anything else,
Shen explained before looking to Valen. The scientist attempted to stand straighter and fix Bradford with her most severe glare, but the effect of the glare was lessened when she swayed slightly before leaning heavily on her cane.
The risks are far greater if we do nothing. The moment she dies, her people will know about it. I do not want to be the one to explain why one of our weapons was the cause.
For nearly a minute, the room was silent as Bradford crossed his arms and looked away. Do it, he ordered as he turned back to face the others. I want to be notified the moment it's finished and before the first test is attempted.
Will do,
Shen said as he turned to leave. But he hesitated when Valen's limping became pronounced before she sank into the wheelchair with a wince.
Moira, do you want to go back to medical?
Yes. Yes, please.
She answered before adding quietly.
Thank you.
Bradford watched as Shen pushed Valen's wheelchair out of the room before he continued. What's the status of the saboteurs that were captured during the defense? Envied. Fujikawa's expression became tight-lipped.
About that.
9:27 a.m., May 27, 2015. Medical, Beta Site.
Your aunt and uncle will be proud though, won't they? Said Hermione, as they got off the train and joined the crowd thronging towards the enchanted barrier. When they hear what you did this year?
Matt read from the faded paperback in his hands.
Proud? Said Harry. Are you crazy? All those times I could have died and I didn't manage it. They'll be furious. And together, they walked back through the gateway to the Muggle world.
The book closed in Matt's hands and he forced himself to look to his side. Twilight lay on the bed on her side, and the only sign of life were her shallow breaths and the soft beeping of the machines around her. Her mane was an unkempt mess, and her lavender coat was stained with dry sweat. A swath of bandages wrapped her barrel, which rose and fell with each breath. Her eyes were squeezed shut, which gave her a pained expression, even while asleep. For a long moment, Matt simply stared at her, before he closed his eyes and replayed the events of the bloody base defense in his mind.
Harris! This is Finch! Bloody unicorn just disappeared after squashing a mechtoid like a bug!
Matt heard the report, but it was no longer his main concern as Twilight appeared in the heart of the hangar. The lavender flames that engulfed the unicorn lashed out at the nearest aliens and turned them into solid stone. A pair of mechtoids that had been laying down suppressing fire against the humans turned and charged Twilight. Their volleys of plasma fire disappeared into the lavender flames, and Twilight didn't respond to the attack until one got close enough to swing one of the plasma cannons at her. The blue shields around the first mechtoid flared as it met the lavender flames, before they flickered out entirely. A moment later, the entire robotic alien was nothing more than a statue. The second mechtoid stopped just short of making the same mistake its predecessor did by stopping a dozen feet from Twilight and leveling its plasma cannons to fire. The shots went wild when the petrified mechtoid was highlighted in with Twilight's energy and slammed into the second robotic alien. Twilight turned to face the new threat and the statue slammed into the still active mechtoid again and again until its shields dispersed and it too was petrified. A few moments more of frantic fighting ensued as the humans flooded into the suddenly enemy-free hangar. A significant number of the soldiers were leveling their weapons at Twilight, but no shots rang out as Bradford's shouts to hold fire were obeyed. Matt waved down the nearest soldiers and stepped forward. He kept his weapon pointed towards the ground as he shouted, "Twilight! Twilight!" Twilight's head turned and the lavender flames disappeared. Her legs threatened to buckle beneath her as she sobbed Matt's name.
They killed everyone!
She screamed before he could approach, and she vanished in a flash.
Get to the surface!
Bradford ordered, and Matt did a double take when he saw that the commander had fallen to his knees and held his head in his hands.
The black ship! Shoot the black ship!
The urgency in his voice was obvious, so Matt turned towards the surface access tunnel with Zhang and the rest of Strike 1 following close behind. The surface was complete and total chaos, with the burning wreckage of a handful of several ships and over a dozen human fighter craft providing a small degree of illumination in the evening hours. The petrified aliens were everywhere, but Twilight wasn't anywhere to be seen.
Black ship. Twilight's on board,
Zhang reported, and Matt turned to see the sniper assume a shooter's stance and aim into the roaring dogfight with his lank. A thumb press disabled the weapon's range and power safeties as he pulled the trigger. A single shot flew from the rifle and struck the underside of the ship. The effect was immediate, as the formation of alien ships lost cohesion and began to fall apart. The careful screen of scout ships that prevented the interceptors and National Guard craft from approaching with their attack runs began to branch off in pursuit of individual targets, and were promptly annihilated by interceptors. With their defensive screen disappearing, the battleships attempted to ascend. The ship with a gaping hole in its midsection suffered a series of internal explosions and dropped like a stone, but the other continued to ascend to disappear into the night with a half-dozen smaller ships in its wake. Matt's attention was elsewhere when Twilight appeared some distance away. Her teleport dumped her to the ground, where she struggled to stand. Matt poured on the speed to link up with her, and she stumbled forward to do her best to meet him halfway. Then there was a bang. The present. One of the doctors in another section of the medical wing dropped what sounded like a metal tray, which shook Matt from his attempts to find out just what he could have done better. He looked over to Twilight, only to see that he had reached over to place one hand on Twilight's head with his index finger, rubbing one of her ears while he had been thinking. He yanked the hand away the moment he realized what he was doing and stood.
God damn it, man. She isn't some dog they hit with your car.
Matt turned on his heel to leave, but the one thing that could stop him happened.
Matt.
The word was quiet and weak, but it froze Matt in place where he stood. He looked back to see one of Twilight's eyes were open just a bit, and it was locked on him.
Hey, Twilight. I'm sorry if I woke you,
Matt said quickly as he pulled up his chair and resumed his seat.
You've had us scared for a while. How are you feeling?
Tired. And hurt.
Twilight replied with a great deal of effort.
I'm sorry. I didn't want to scare anyone.
Tears began to leak from her eyes and into the pillow her head rested on.
They killed everyone. Kim, Joel, and Moira are dead because I did nothing.
Moira's alive. And it's all thanks to you, Twilight. We all saw what you did. And you saved a lot of people.
Matt explained quickly, and he tried to force a smile.
No one blames you for what you did. I'm pretty sure there are quite a few people who would thank you if they could.
What I did?
The question was so unexpected that Matt nearly stumbled over the answer.
You saved everyone, Twilight. You showed up and drove the aliens back.
A moment of silence passed between the two before Twilight spoke again.
Matt?
The inquiry was softly spoken, but he was quick to acknowledge it with a nod.
Could you scratch my ears, please?
Matt raised the same hand he had previously placed on Twilight's head, but this time it hovered indecisively over her before gently settling where it once was. He had to resist the urge to pull away as he felt her push into his palm once the contact was made. The pressure stopped soon after she drifted back to sleep. Matt wasn't certain how long they held that position before the silence was broken. The door to Twilight's room opened to reveal Lana. She silently stepped into the room and closed the door behind her before standing beside the bed.
Commander Bradford wants to see you. Did you finish the book?
Her gaze drifted from the book on the table beside them to Matt's hand and Twilight's closed eyes. She stayed silent, but raised one eyebrow at the arrangement.
She was awake earlier, but I think it took a lot out of her. And yes, I did finish the book.
Matt answered quietly as he rose.
Did he say what he wanted?
No, sorry. Just that you needed to see him immediately. Go, I'll take over.
Lana said as she produced a book of her own and began to read.
Harry Potter was a highly unusual boy. In many ways.
She started before the door closed behind Matt. He gave a brief nod to both security guards that flanked the door before turning and making his way out of the medical wing. Unfamiliar corridors greeted him, but the directions to Bradford's office were clear, and less than 5 minutes later, he found himself standing at attention in front of the commander's desk.
Glad you could make it on such short notice, Lieutenant,
Bradford said with a degree of sympathy as he looked up from his tablet.
It is last minute, but there's a mission I need Strike One to undertake. Due to the unique nature of this mission, I cannot order you to do it. I can only ask you to volunteer, and I suspect that you will.
Bradford offered the tablet to Matt.
Sir, with all due respect, I don't think that's such a good idea right now.
Matt started to say, but he stopped when Bradford merely pointed at the tablet and waited. He took the hints and began to scroll through the mission description and details.
Are you serious?
Matt blurted out before he could stop himself.
Completely,
Bradford answered.
I've reserved one of the briefing rooms for you this afternoon. And while it's against standard operating procedure, I imagine Major Fujikawa and Private Romalov would like to attend the briefing as well. I expect to have a list of volunteers for the operation by tomorrow morning. The operation will commence the day after. Yes, sir,
Matt said as he turned and exited the office.
Bradford's right. I'd volunteer for this in a heartbeat.
Well, at least everything has calmed down a little bit, but my god. Things are still pretty tense, understandably anyway. Anyway, I'd like to give a very special thank you to my non-tense donators. Yoshi Super Saiyan 2, Peter Coulthard, Dresdon, Dospo, RuneScythe9852, CourierCruz CI, Rainbow Dash 1990, Dwight Cornel, Gagi, Secret Moon, ORIAN KAIJU, Starlight Glimmer, David D. Sanchez, Trey, Pokekillerzach, SoulDragon, Dak Britton, Joe Pierce E, and Reno. Thank you all very much for watching this video, and I will see you all in the next one.